From the moment I met you, I knew there was no turning back.
Even if your world destroys mine, I'll still choose you.
She kissed a stranger to make her ex jealous, not knowing he was a mafia boss. The chatter of the upscale bar became a muted hum as I saw David walk in. His arm was slung around a woman young enough to still be carrying a fake ID. It had only been 3 months since our divorce, and yet the sight of him still twisted my stomach into knots of anger and pure humiliation. I hadn't planned on running into my ex-husband tonight, hadn't even bothered to dress for a potential confrontation. I was wearing my one halfway decent black dress, the only survivor of the financial bloodbath he'd orchestrated. But there he was, parading his new life, while I sipped a drink that was stretching my budget to its absolute limit. The bartender quietly slid another martini in front of me, nodding towards the other end of the bar. "Courtesy of the gentleman in the corner," he murmured, his voice barely cutting through the soft jazz quartet playing in the background. My eyes followed the bartender's gesture and landed on a man sitting alone. His tailored suit and air of quiet confidence immediately distinguished him from the usual weekend crowd. Dark eyes met mine with an intensity that made me forget to breathe. A silent acknowledgement passed between us as he subtly raised his glass. David's obnoxious laughter suddenly sliced through my moment of distraction, dragging my attention back to where he stood with his date. He was now scanning the room as if he was looking for an audience to perform for. I knew that laugh well, the theatrical one he used when he was desperate to be noticed. The one that always preceded him making some kind of cutting remark at someone else's expense. His gaze finally found mine across the crowded room, and a flash of triumph danced in his eyes when he recognized me. I could already hear the story he'd embellish later for his friends. It would be about his pathetic ex-wife, drinking alone on a Friday night, and still wearing the earrings he'd given me before our entire world imploded. Something inside me just snapped. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was sliding off my bar stool, martini clutched in hand, and walking with what I hoped was deliberate confidence towards the mysterious man who'd bought my drink. I didn't have any kind of real plan beyond simply escaping David's smug, pitying gaze. I just had this desperate need to not be cast as the victim in tonight's little narrative. The stranger watched me approach with undisguised interest, his expression unreadable as I leaned down and whispered, "I need a huge favor. My ex just walked in, and I'd really rather not look like the sad divorcee drinking alone tonight." His lips curved into a slight smile that completely transformed his serious face, creating a dimple in his right cheek that seemed almost at odds with his otherwise intimidating presence. "What exactly did you have in mind?" he asked, his voice deep and laced with a subtle accent I couldn't quite place. "Just pretend you know me," I blurted out, setting my drink down and trying to gather my scattered wits. "Maybe laugh at something I say, anything. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes of your time to salvage what's left of my dignity." What happened next was definitely not part of my spur-of-the-moment plan. As David's intense gaze burned into the back of my head, the stranger stood up in one smooth, fluid motion. He gently cupped my face with his hand as he leaned in close. "Perhaps this would be more convincing," he murmured, giving me just a split second to pull away before his lips met mine. The kiss was surprisingly gentle but undeniably purposeful, his hand warm and steady against my cheek, as the entire room seemed to tilt precariously around us. I hadn't kissed anyone since David, and I definitely hadn't felt this disorienting rush of connection with a complete stranger whose name I didn't even know. When we finally broke apart, the stranger's eyes held a strange glint of amusement, and something darker, almost dangerous. "Vincent," he said simply, his thumb brushing lightly across my lower lip in a gesture that felt strangely possessive for someone I'd literally just met. "Lily," I responded, my voice embarrassingly breathless as I tried to regain some semblance of composure. I risked a quick glance in David's direction, finding him staring in complete and undisguised shock, his date completely forgotten as he watched the entire scene unfold with narrowed eyes. Vincent followed my gaze, his posture subtly shifting as he quickly assessed David across the room. Something in his stance changed, a predatory stillness settling over him that made the hairs on my arms stand on end, despite the relative warmth of the crowded bar. "Your ex-husband seems displeased," Vincent observed, his hand moving to the small of my back with effortless ease, as though we'd known each other for years instead of mere minutes. The casual possessiveness of the gesture certainly wasn't lost on David, whose face had now flushed an angry red. I should have felt triumphant seeing David's reaction, but something in his expression actually sent a chill right through me. It was the familiar tightening of his jaw that had always preceded his worst outbursts during our marriage. I should probably go, I murmured, suddenly aware that my impulsive act might have consequences that stretched far beyond just tonight. Vincent's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly against my back. "Allow me to walk you out," he said, the suggestion carrying a weight that definitely didn't invite refusal. He signaled to the bartender, who nodded in immediate understanding, as though Vincent was a regular customer whose requests were always prioritized. Outside, the September air felt cool against my flushed skin, as Vincent guided me towards a sleek black car, waiting right at the curb. A man in a dark suit opened the door without being prompted, his expression impassive as he nodded respectfully to Vincent. "I appreciate the rescue, but I can get myself home," I said, stepping back slightly, suddenly hyper-aware of how little I really knew about the man whose lips had been on mine just moments ago. The kiss had definitely been more than enough to make my point. Vincent's expression softened just slightly, though his eyes remained watchful as they scanned the street behind me. "Your ex-husband is currently arguing with the bouncer in a desperate attempt to follow us out," he said calmly. "I'm simply offering you a ride to ensure he doesn't continue this interaction elsewhere." My stomach dropped at his words, vivid memories of David's uncontrollable temper flashing through my mind. The thrown glasses, the fist-sized hole punched in the wall inches from my head, the whispered promises that next time he wouldn't miss. I hadn't told anyone about those moments. I had hidden all the evidence and made up excuses until finally filing for divorce after I found him with his assistant. Vincent must have seen the fear reflected in my expression, because his voice gentled even further. "You're safe with me, Lily. I have absolutely no expectations beyond making sure you get home without any further incidents," he said, holding out his hand like he was offering me a lifeline. I hesitated for only a moment before taking it, sliding into the car's luxurious leather interior that smelled of expensive cologne and subtle power. Vincent joined me, giving the driver an address I didn't recognize. He then asked for my phone and quickly typed something before returning it. "We're not going to my apartment, are we?" I asked as the car made a sharp turn, heading in the opposite direction from my modest rental in Queens. My fingers tightened around my purse, suddenly acutely aware of just how vulnerable my position was, sitting in a stranger's car, heading to an unknown destination. Vincent's expression remained completely unreadable as the streetlights flashed across his face. "I have a penthouse in Manhattan where you'll be perfectly safe tonight," he said, his tone completely matter-of-fact. "Your ex-husband has your address, I assume." The casual way he assessed the entire situation sent another chill through me. It was his immediate understanding of a potential danger that most people would probably just dismiss. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I remembered the times I'd found David's car parked outside my building, weeks after our divorce had been finalized. The car glided to a stop in front of a towering high-rise, its glass exterior reflecting the city lights like a giant midnight mirror. A doorman immediately stepped forward, opening the car door with a respectful, "Good evening, Mr. Moretti," that seemed to carry a weight far beyond simple courtesy. Inside the lobby, security nodded to Vincent without requiring any identification whatsoever, their eyes scanning me with a professional assessment before returning to a vigilant observation of the entrance. The exclusive access, the immediate deference, it all painted a clear picture of a man whose influence extended far beyond anything I could have possibly imagined back at the bar. The elevator required a keycard and a fingerprint scan, rising silently to the very top floor, where it opened directly into a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The modern furnishings, all in shades of gray and black, provided a stark contrast with the art pieces that I instantly recognized as museum-worthy originals. "Make yourself comfortable," Vincent said, removing his suit jacket and carefully draping it over a nearby chair. "The guest room is through that door if you'd like to get some rest. There are new toiletries and some clothes that should fit you in the bathroom." I stood frozen in the center of the massive living room, still trying to process the surreal turn my evening had suddenly taken. "Who exactly keeps women's clothing in their guest bathroom?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice as I considered the possible implications. Vincent's lips curved slightly as he poured 2 glasses of an amber liquid from a crystal decanter. My sister stays here occasionally, he explained, offering me a glass. Though I suspect you have other questions beyond my somewhat questionable housekeeping arrangements. The whiskey burned pleasantly as I took a small sip, gathering the courage to voice the thoughts swirling wildly through my mind. The car, the security, this place. Who are you, Vincent? Really? He studied me for a long moment, as though he was carefully deciding how much of the actual truth I could handle. I manage various business interests throughout the city, he finally said, his deliberate vagueness being far more telling than any specific answer ever could be. An alert suddenly chimed from his phone, instantly drawing his attention away from me. His expression hardened as he quickly read something on the screen, his fingers typing a quick response before he returned his focus to me with practiced ease. 3 days quickly turned into a week at Vincent's luxurious penthouse. Each night began with my insistence that I really should return to my own apartment, and each morning dawned with me still wrapped in a level of unimaginable luxury I'd never even known existed. My modest job as a graphic designer actually allowed for remote work, and Vincent had already arranged for my most essential belongings to be collected by his staff. David has been watching your apartment, Vincent explained over breakfast one morning, sliding a tablet across the table to show me security footage of my ex lurking in the parking lot. The casual way he monitored David's movements really should have frightened me, but instead it offered a strange kind of comfort that I definitely wasn't ready to examine too closely. My 5-year-old daughter, Emma, adjusted to our temporary arrangement with surprising ease, completely delighted by all of the penthouse's hidden features. A bookshelf that magically revealed a secret playroom, a bathtub with jets that created rainbow-colored bubbles, and a personal chef who made pancakes shaped like her favorite cartoon characters at her slightest request. Vincent's behavior around Emma revealed a gentleness I honestly hadn't expected. His usual intensity noticeably softened whenever she shyly asked him to read her bedtime stories or help her build elaborate pillow forts in the middle of the living room. He never overstepped any boundaries, never presumed to take on any kind of role in her life. Yet something incredibly natural had developed between them that made my heart ache in ways I couldn't quite explain. Every night after Emma had finally fallen asleep, Vincent and I would talk for hours out on the balcony, overlooking the glittering city below. He shared carefully edited stories about his childhood in Sicily, of a father whose expectations weighed on him like concrete, of responsibilities he had inherited rather than chosen, always omitting any specific details that might somehow reveal the actual true nature of his real business. I reciprocated with my own stories, my dreams of becoming a real artist derailed by practical concerns, my whirlwind romance with David that had slowly transformed into a controlling nightmare, and my absolute determination to give Emma a life completely unmarred by the constant fear that had overshadowed so much of my marriage. "You're much stronger than you realize," Vincent said one evening, his fingers gently tracing the faded scar along my wrist. It was clear evidence of the night David had grabbed me so hard he'd actually drawn blood. The tenderness of his touch contrasted sharply with the cold fury that flashed in his eyes as he examined the mark. Our first real kiss came about 2 weeks after the initial bar incident. It wasn't a performance for an audience, but something incredibly genuine that just happened in his kitchen at midnight. I'd come looking for some tea, but instead found him staring out the window with a glass of whiskey and deep shadows in his eyes. The attraction between us had definitely been building since that very first night, present in our lingering glances, in our hands that found any excuse to touch, and in conversations that somehow stretched on until dawn. But it was his brief glimpse of vulnerability that finally broke down my last resistance. It was that incredibly rare glimpse of uncertainty in a man who so clearly controlled everything around him. "I really should tell you to just leave," he whispered against my lips, his hands cradling my face as though I might shatter into a million pieces. "There are parts of my life you really don't want to know about, Lily. Things that would make you grab Emma and just run as fast as you possibly can." I knew he was absolutely right. I had seen enough to piece together the reality of who Vincent Moretti truly was. The late-night meetings, the coded phone conversations, the men who appeared with bruised knuckles and respectful deference, always seeking his guidance and approval. Yet still, I pressed myself closer to him, seeking his warmth despite the very real danger it clearly represented. Something had irrevocably shifted between us after that night. An unspoken acknowledgement that we were now crossing boundaries that really couldn't be easily redrawn. Vincent began to introduce me to carefully selected aspects of his world. Art auctions, where millions of dollars exchanged hands with just casual nods. Restaurants where chefs prepared elaborate meals that were never actually listed on any of the menus. Private clubs where all conversations hushed to a respectful silence when he simply walked through the door. About a month into our strange and unconventional arrangement, reality brutally intruded in the form of legal papers, delivered directly to Vincent's penthouse. It was David's official petition for full custody of Emma, citing my immoral lifestyle and dangerous associations as undeniable evidence of my complete unfitness as a mother. The documents included strategically taken photos of me entering Vincent's building, emerging from his car, and even holding his hand at a restaurant. "He's been having us followed," I whispered, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I spread all of the papers across Vincent's massive desk. The thought of David's eyes tracking my every movement, documenting moments I had thought were so private and intimate, made me feel physically ill. Vincent's response was one of controlled fury, a careful stillness that somehow felt far more dangerous than any kind of violent outburst ever could. He made a single brief phone call, speaking in rapid-fire Italian before switching to English only to say no harm comes to him, just information. Within just a few short hours, a thick folder appeared, containing details about David's life that honestly shocked even me. Massive gambling debts owed to people who definitely didn't use legal means of collection. A separate apartment maintained solely for meetings with women barely out of high school. Offshore accounts used to hide money that really should have been declared during our divorce settlement. "Use this," Vincent said, sliding the damning folder towards me. "Your lawyer can now negotiate from a real position of strength." He didn't mention how this incredibly detailed information had been obtained, and I certainly didn't ask. It was just another unspoken agreement in our complex relationship, built on selective truths. The threat of losing custody of Emma forced us to have those difficult conversations we'd both been actively avoiding. Conversations about what exactly we were to each other, about the actual future, about the stark realities of Vincent's dangerous world, and whether there could ever truly be a place for Emma and me within it. Late-night whispers became tense discussions that left us both completely restless and profoundly uncertain. "I want you both in my life," Vincent admitted one night, his usual intimidating confidence finally giving way to a rare glimpse of vulnerability. "But my life comes with risks you really can't imagine, enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use you and Emma to get to me." I'd suspected the real truth for weeks, had seen the obvious signs in all of the security that constantly surrounded us, in the distinct difference shown to Vincent throughout the entire city, and in the way certain names were never directly spoken in his presence. Still, just hearing him finally acknowledge the ever-present danger made it all suddenly, frighteningly real. "Tell me everything," I said, finally needing to face the complete truth about the man I had somehow fallen in love with. No more half-truths or careful omissions. "I need to know exactly who you are, Vincent." His confession came quietly, almost matter-of-factly, as we sat on his balcony overlooking a city he had described in pieces, but had never fully explained his actual role within. The Moretti family's complete control of distribution channels throughout the Northeast, the legitimate businesses that were used to clean money from their far less savory operations. His position as the heir apparent, following his father's recent illness. Each revelation really should have sent me running for the hills, should have immediately confirmed every single fear I had desperately tried to push aside. Instead, I found myself focusing solely on the man beneath the title. The way he gently tucked Emma into bed at night, his genuine respect for my independence, and his absolute determination to shield us both from the ever-present darkness of his world. The very next morning brought a critical moment of choice. I could take Emma and just leave, returning to a life of constant fear of David, but safely distant from Vincent's impossibly dangerous world. Or I could choose to stay and fully accept the complicated reality of loving a man whose immense power was undeniably built on foundations I had always considered inherently immoral. "I want to see it," I said over breakfast, Emma happily distracted by cartoons in the other room. Vincent's questioning look clearly prompted me to continue. Your business, your actual offices, the parts you've been actively hiding. If I'm seriously making this choice, I really need to see absolutely everything. His hesitation was clearly visible, a rare crack in his usually seamless and impenetrable composure. Some doors really can't be unclosed, Lily, he said finally, studying my face intently as though he was trying to memorize it, perhaps fearing it would be the very last time I ever looked at him without fear or judgment. The sleek black car took us to a completely unassuming building in Little Italy, the restaurant on the ground floor bustling with lunchtime customers, who all greeted Vincent with a familiarity that spoke of generations of complete loyalty. An elderly woman named Maria embraced him like a son before turning her curious eyes on me, assessing me with the shrewd judgment of someone who had seen countless women come and go over the years. Behind the bustling kitchen, a heavy reinforced door led to a narrow staircase descending into what appeared to be a wine cellar, but actually opened into a sophisticated and highly secure office space. Men in expensive suits paused in their intense conversations as we entered, their respectful nods silently acknowledging Vincent's absolute authority without question. Enzo, Vincent's consigliere, according to the brief introduction, simply raised an eyebrow at my unexpected presence, but made absolutely no comment as he handed over a thick leather portfolio containing what I immediately recognized as detailed balance sheets and extensive property acquisitions. The casual way they discussed millions of dollars in transactions made my graphic designer salary seem almost laughably insignificant. I observed silently as Vincent moved through his world with effortless command, resolving heated disputes between local business owners seeking protection, reviewing detailed reports of territory incursions by rival families, and authorizing payments to politicians whose campaigns clearly benefited from Moretti's support. The immense power he wielded was absolute and absolutely terrifying in its full scope. What struck me most wasn't just the obvious illegality of certain operations, but also the incredibly complex moral code that governed absolutely everything. Respect for tradition, unwavering protection of family above absolutely all else, and a strange but clearly defined honor system that drew very clear lines, even in the most serious criminal enterprise. Vincent's world definitely operated by rules that were just as rigid as any legal system, just with very different boundaries and far more severe consequences. By late afternoon, I had definitely seen enough to fully understand the vast empire Vincent controlled, and the incredible weight he was forced to carry on his broad shoulders. "You're absolutely right to be scared," he said quietly as we returned to the waiting car, his hand finding mine with tentative uncertainty. "I really wouldn't blame you at all for just walking away from all of this." Something had shifted deep within me during those intense hours. My previously naive perception had finally given way to a much clearer understanding of both the ever-present danger and the complex man behind it all. Vincent wasn't just a common criminal. He was a leader, fiercely protecting his people, and maintaining order in a very complex system that actually predated him and would likely continue long after him. He was constantly trying to steer it towards some semblance of legitimacy, while still honoring his long-standing commitments to all those who depended on him for their very survival. "I just need some time," I whispered, completely overwhelmed by everything I had witnessed. "Time to really think about what this all actually means for Emma, and for us. I can't just—" My voice trailed off as Vincent's phone suddenly rang, his expression immediately hardening as he answered with a curt Italian word that instantly silenced the entire car. The attack came completely without warning. 3 of David's hired men, acting on very specific information he'd actually sold to the ruthless Colombo family about Vincent's carefully guarded security routines. The ambush in the underground parking garage might have actually succeeded if not for Enzo's deep suspicions about some unusual payments that had been traced directly to David's offshore accounts. Vincent returned to the penthouse with a bullet graze across his shoulder and a coldness in his eyes I had honestly never seen before. "Pack only essentials for you and Emma," he instructed, his voice leaving absolutely no room for any questions. "We're leaving in exactly 1 hour." The stark reality of Vincent's dangerous world crashed violently into mine with absolutely terrifying clarity. As security teams swept the entire penthouse, meticulously checking for any hidden surveillance devices and any potential weaknesses in our protective detail. Emma watched wide-eyed from her bedroom doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit as men with concealed weapons moved silently and efficiently through our temporary home. The safe house in Sicily had been in Vincent's family for generations, a sprawling villa surrounded by seemingly endless olive groves and protected by both state-of-the-art modern security systems and the unwavering loyalty of the local villagers whose families had served the Moretti name for literally decades. In any other circumstances, it would have definitely felt like paradise. Vincent's father, Antonio, occupied the east wing of the villa. His once powerfully built frame was now sadly diminished by illness, but his eyes were still incredibly sharp as they intently assessed both me and Emma upon our somewhat chaotic arrival. He spoke in rapid-fire Italian to his son, asking questions I couldn't understand but whose meaning I could easily guess from the defensive tension in Vincent's carefully measured responses. "He wants to know if you truly understand what loving me actually means," Vincent translated later as we stood together on the expansive terrace overlooking the glittering Mediterranean Sea. "If you're completely prepared for a life where danger will always exist just at the edges, where Emma will someday have to learn truths that might actually make her hate both of us." The old man's loaded question hung heavily between us as the days slowly turned into weeks there in Sicily. Emma quickly adapted to her new surroundings with the amazing resilience of childhood, picking up Italian phrases from the villa's kind housekeeper, collecting colorful seashells along the private beach, and falling sound asleep to Vincent's captivating stories about the island's ancient myths and legends. I found an unexpected sense of peace in the villa's sunlit gardens, sketching for the very first time in years as Vincent managed his complex business remotely, restructuring operations all the way back in New York, while David's betrayal was being dealt with in ways that he carefully didn't detail to me. The physical distance provided a much-needed clarity I had definitely lacked in the whirlwind of New York. Antonio's health declined rapidly during our third week there, bringing all of Vincent's siblings and their respective families to the villa for what everyone sadly recognized might be final goodbyes. I watched as his various cousins warmly welcomed Emma into their playful games without hesitation, as Vincent's sisters evaluated me with guarded curiosity, and as the complex network of Moretti family dynamics revealed itself in almost every single interaction. "You really don't have to stay," Vincent said one night, finding me alone on the beach after Antonio had endured a particularly difficult day. "I've already arranged the papers, the accounts, and even a completely new identity in Vancouver. You and Emma could just disappear and start completely fresh somewhere David would never be able to find you." The sudden offer completely caught me off guard, not because it was totally unexpected, but because I immediately realized I really didn't want it. Somewhere in the chaos of the past few months, in the fear and the uncertainty and the shocking revelations, I had already made my decision without even consciously acknowledging it to myself. I turned to face Vincent, seeing not the dangerous mafia boss or the powerful businessman, but simply the man who read Emma bedtime stories and actually laughed at my terrible attempts at cooking authentic Italian food. "This is exactly where we truly belong," I said, the unwavering certainty in my voice surprising both of us. Antonio Moretti passed away peacefully the following morning, his frail hand clasped tightly in Vincent's as the first light of dawn gently filtered through the bedroom windows. The funeral brought family members from across both Europe and America, the small village church filled with somber black-clad figures, whose solemn respect transcended all language barriers. I stood silently beside Vincent throughout the entire service, Emma's small hand safely tucked in mine, as she solemnly mimicked the behaviors of the other Italian children around her. The village priest spoke of legacy and family, of sins and eventual redemption, his carefully chosen words washing over me as I watched Vincent accept his father's role with quiet dignity. The official reading of Antonio's will took place in the villa's study, with family members seated strictly according to long-standing tradition, while Enzo, who had flown in specifically after the funeral, sealed envelopes were handed out to each of Vincent's siblings. My surprise at being included among the recipients must have been pretty obvious, because the consigliere gave me this rare, almost shy smile. Inside my envelope wasn't money or property, but a delicate silver key on a chain. It was Antonio's final message, delivered through Vincent's mother's locket, which had been locked tight since her death 20 years earlier. The sharp way Vincent sucked in a breath told me this was more than just jewelry. He approved, I could tell, Later that night, Vincent whispered about it, the locket lying open on the bedside table, revealing a tiny compartment with a handwritten note inside. He almost never gave his blessing to anyone outside the family, but he wrote this the night after we arrived. The transfer of power happened with almost ceremonial precision in the days following the funeral. Vincent accepted the responsibilities of his birthright in rituals that were a real mix of Catholic tradition and older, more secretive practices. I watched as the weight of it settled onto his shoulders, and the last little bits of hesitation just faded away, replaced by this solid determination. Our return to New York meant changes were already happening. Vincent's legitimate businesses were expanding, while other, shall we say, less legitimate operations were quietly being dismantled. Security was completely redesigned to put layers between his public life and private dealings. It was a path toward being legit, but one that was going to take years, not happen overnight. David had vanished while we were gone. I heard his debts to some seriously dangerous creditors had been paid off by some anonymous benefactor, on the condition that he move permanently to the West Coast. I never asked Vincent for the specifics, just trying to keep that careful balance of knowing enough but not too much. The custody papers were withdrawn and replaced with a really generous agreement that gave up all of David's parental rights in return for a financial settlement that would make sure Emma's education was covered through college. His signature on those documents. I'd never seen his handwriting look so shaky, so uncertain. We moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn instead of going back to the Manhattan penthouse. It was a home with a garden where Emma could play, a studio where I could finally do my art, which I'd given up years before. And of course, security features were subtly built into what looked like normal architecture. It was a compromise between Vincent's world and mine. Marriage came a year later. It was a small ceremony on the terrace of the Sicilian villa. Emma was so proud, scattering flower petals before us, while Vincent's siblings and their families were all there, mingling with the few close friends I'd managed to keep through all the chaos of the past few years. No big public show, just a private promise between two people who found each other in the most unexpected way. I never imagined this life, I told Vincent as we danced under strings of lights, with the Mediterranean Sea glittering behind us. When I kissed you that night at the bar, I was just trying to make David jealous. I had no idea I was kissing my future, my fate. Thank you all for following this story. If you're enjoying it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support is what allows me to continue creating these stories for.